Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to get started in about 5 minutes. So if you could just make sure that your video is stopped and that your mic is muted, it'll make sure we can keep things running along smoothly for everybody. And if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat section and we'll keep an eye on that throughout the webinar today to make sure any questions or thoughts or ideas you have are shared. So we'll get going right at 1 o'clock. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Just a reminder for folks who are joining in, please make sure that you have muted your mic and stopped your video. This will just help make sure that everything runs smoothly for all of us. I'm going to leave my video up just so you can see who is talking to you. But we're going to get started here in just a second. If you do have any questions during the webinar, please use the chat function. You can drop anything you need in there, and by the end of our session today, we'll make sure to get to any questions that you might have. And also just a reminder, there's going to be a lot of us here, so please be respectful. I'm really excited to have you all here with us. And DBH is offering these webinars twice a week, so keep your eyes peeled for the next ones. The next one will be this coming Tuesday, or excuse me, today is Tuesday, this coming Thursday. And we'll have information for you to sign up for that one at the end of today's webinar. So again, just make sure you're muted and that your video is stopped, and let's get started. So today, we are going to be talking about supporting children during COVID-19. This is a topic that's been getting a lot of coverage, and it's something that I really wanted to talk to you all about. My name is Leah Mundy-Marr. I am the Child and Adolescent Training Specialist at BH10. And so we are going to talk a little bit about some of the specifics of supporting kids during this time, but also take this as a bit of a refresher for ourselves, because part of being able to support the kids that we're working with and living with and caring about is making sure that we're able to take a moment for ourselves to be able to provide that support. So some of this may be a little bit of a refresher for you, but again, I want us to kind of reframe how we're approaching these conversations and the way we're interacting with kids and clients during this time. So just a heads up that we are recording this webinar, and that means that you don't need to be scribbling notes the whole time if you don't want to. But if you want to share this with someone else who wasn't able to actually participate or sign up today, the recording will be made available at bh10.com and possibly on the DBH IDS Learning Hub at some point, but the place to go will be the BH10 website to get access to it soon. So if there's a resource or something that you want, you'll be able to get it there. And then we will also send out all the slides, including those resources, to everyone who is participating today through the email that you registered with after the webinar. So that should be to you in the next couple of days. Okay, so what we're gonna cover today, we are going to start by talking about COVID-19 with kids. What does that actually look like? How do we go about doing that? And then we're going to cover some of the common stress responses that we see in kids and adolescents, and then talk a little bit about some strategies that we can use to help kids manage that stress. We'll round it out with a bunch of resources for keeping busy and helping to manage that stress. And then we'll close out talking a little bit about different and creative ways that you might be able to connect with clients during this completely unprecedented time that we're all living in. So by the end of today, we're all going to be able to describe how to use developmentally appropriate language to talk about COVID-19 with kids. We are going to be able to list some methods of addressing children's stress responses, and hopefully you'll all have at least one new idea about how to connect with your clients or maintain good client contact even when traditional treatment is disrupted, as it currently has been. So to start, when we're talking about COVID-19 with children, there's a couple things we want to keep in mind. So the first that we're going to cover is using developmentally appropriate language, and really what that can look like with a tricky topic like this one that we are all as adults still figuring out how to phrase things and define new words that we've never had to use before. And then also talking about how do we go about choosing which information we actually share? What do the kids that we're working with and the families that we're working with need to know and need to understand to be able to get information to the kids? So starting with developmentally appropriate language, the main thing is we want to be choosing our words carefully, right? So especially when we're in stressful situations, this is a hard time to be learning new vocabulary words and be hearing things that we might not completely understand. So keeping in mind for all of us that simple language is easier, and that if you are coming across new words, to be sure to define those terms for kids, right? So making sure that they know when they hear a new word that they're going to get some information about what that means so that it's easier for them to process. So for example, we're talking all the time about social distancing, right? So what does that actually mean? This is something that I think a lot of us have tried to figure out. What does that actually mean? So ways to say it to a young child versus a teenager are going to be different. And for a young one, it might be something like, we're spending time at home with just our family so we don't spread any germs and so we can stay healthy, right? It doesn't need to be going into all of the scientific reasoning for all of this. It's just, what is the end goal, right? And this is language that a young one can understand. For an older person, it might be, well, why can't I go over to my friend's house? And that's when, we have to limit our contact with other people so we don't spread this virus or get it from someone else. And this is where, people need to be choosing their words for the child that they're talking to. Because it could be something for a 3-year-old, you're talking about the icky stuff in our bodies that we don't want around. And then for an older kid, you can move up to using language like virus and things like that they might be better able to understand. And then moving into things like, what's the difference between social distancing and quarantining, right? So for quarantining, this is a step farther from social distancing. So now for a younger child, you might be saying something like, we're staying at home because we might have gotten sick or someone around us might have been sick. So we need to be in a safe place to take care of ourselves, right? For an older kid, you can go into more detail. We got to stay at home because we might have been exposed, and my goal is not to spread it to anybody else. So that's what we're doing. That's what quarantining is. Versus social distancing is limiting our contact. We can still go out into the world and maintain that 6 foot between folks distance, right? And then it can get more advanced into, okay, now we have gotten sick, we need to isolate. Isolating means that, we can't be around any other people until our bodies feel better or until we're not contagious anymore, whatever language is going to make sense to the child to whom you are speaking. And part of that is also remembering the age of the child that you're talking to, right? So like I mentioned before, it's going to look a little bit different. Young kids mostly need really basic information and reassurance of their safety, that you as their provider or you as their parent or caregiver, right? Or when you're talking to caregivers that you're working with, making sure that they are reassuring their young ones that they are safe. That's why we're staying at home as much as possible, because home is hopefully a safe place, right? And if it's not, that's another conversation to be having. But for really young kids, this is not going into a lot of detail. I know with, I called my brother and his 2-year-old and 4-year-old are in the background. He said, please just don't say anything about everything that's going on. We're trying not to expose too much. They don't need all that information, right? But if you're talking to a teenager, they may have more specific questions or worries about what's going on that you would want to address with them. So keeping in mind that the conversation happening with mom and daughter on the left is probably going to sound very, very different from conversation between mom and daughter on the right. And age is just one of these considerations. So making sure that if you do need to have a conversation with a 4-year-old, that you're not having it in the same room as the conversation you might have with your 14-year-old, because that information could look so different and might cause unnecessary stress for the younger child who might not understand what you're talking about. And remembering too that development is going to be as important as age here. So taking ability and things like that into account when you're planning out these conversations as well. So, developmental delays or intellectual disabilities are going to affect how a child is able to receive that information, process that information, and you want to be really careful about that when you're talking to your clients and making recommendations for how they might have these conversations, or if you are directly having a conversation with one of your child clients. If you're talking to a caregiver, this is a great time to remind them that they are the expert in their child, and this is where they have a really important role in deciding how this conversation should go and what it should look like. And finally, remembering that the way you have these conversations, the way we carry ourselves during them, is as important as anything. So your tone and your body language and all that really matter. So this is where you want parents and caregivers to be able to take a beat, maybe prepare themselves a little bit before they go in and have these conversations. Or if you've been having a day and it's just been a rough one, you might need to take a moment to prepare yourself a little bit for what this is going to look like. And some of you might be familiar with being capped already, but this is a little concept developed by Dr. Bruce Perry, who's done lots of work with kids in trauma. And this is a great way to remind yourself of how to approach the conversation that you're having with a child. So being capped means you are calm. You are modeling how to feel and be calm for both yourself and the child during this interaction, because when we are calm, it is easier for us to receive new information. You are also going to be attuned. This means we are paying attention to the person that we are talking to. What is their body language? Are they looking me in the eye? Have they completely curled up into a little ball because they're feeling so strongly about something, right? Paying attention to the nonverbal cues that you're getting so that you know if you need to adjust how you're saying something or what you're talking about. The first P is being present. I know every parent in here can attest that as soon as you are not paying attention, your kids notice, right? So part of this is really being in that moment, maybe putting your phone down, making sure you're making that eye contact so that they know that you are here having this conversation with them. Being predictable. This is also very important, especially when we're talking about kids who have had other traumatic or stressful experiences, that they know what to expect from us, right? So when they feel that they know what to expect from us, they don't need to be on their guard, and they're better able, again, to be calm and focused and hear what we have to say. And finally, do not escalate. This is a really helpful way for kids to see how to regulate their emotions. This is us modeling again. So whether this is you talking to your own child or working with a client, they're seeing, okay, I'm really worried about this. I feel stressed about this. But when I'm talking to my worker or my therapist or my case manager or my teacher, they seem to feel like they've got things under control, and that can help them then regulate their own emotions about what's going on, right? So this is what we want our conversations to look like, right? This woman, whether she's parent, auntie, whoever, she is paying attention to this child, she is connecting with this child, and this is a conversation where he might not have a ton of language yet, but he can tell that she is invested in that moment. This is what we want our conversations during these stressful moments to look like. And the final part of this, apart from using language that kids are going to understand based on their age or development or ability, is which information is actually really important for them to know. So it's kind of like a pyramid where we start at the bottom with the most basic and then move on up towards what they are able to hear and what is actually going to serve them. So for like a really young kid, like my brother's saying, let's just keep it on the low. The really little ones don't really need to be hearing much about this specific virus or anything, right? They might notice that there's some changes in the routine and be wondering what that's about, but we don't need to be overloading them with information they're not going to be able to handle. But if we're talking about a kid who might have a couple questions about like, why is this different from when I usually get sick or when people usually get sick, we can start with the basis. What is a coronavirus? It's a big family of viruses that has been around for a long time, and there's all different kinds of them, and it can cause just a regular cold, or sometimes it can make people get more sick than that. So that can be a good base. If there are more questions on top of that, why is this one called COVID-19? What does that mean? COVID-19 is a new kind of coronavirus, so that's why everyone's still kind of figuring out what to do with this one. So it's a new version of the virus. If there are more questions on top of that, then you can move into what kind of virus COVID-19 is, right? So this is a respiratory illness, or this is an illness that affects our lungs, or this is an illness that affects our body parts that help us breathe, right? So again, choosing within that information the correct language to share it with a kid who might have more questions. And then once we might be dealing with an older kid who has more questions or has been getting information on their own, then we might talk about, okay, doctors are still figuring out, because this is a new version of the illness, we still don't know the best treatments, right? So this is also a good time to throw in some of the hope that is really necessary that we also be communicating, and point out that there are lots of people who are working every single day in order to determine the best treatments for this. And finally, up at the very top, this is going to be where we are talking to adolescents, probably. Kids who are going out and getting their own information from all kinds of different sources. And what we want to do is make sure that they are going to accurate and reliable sources. So the post that they saw on Instagram could be credible, but we're not sure. So this is an important conversation about where do we actually go to get our information so that we know that what we are reading and sharing and talking about is something we can rely on, right? And not necessarily that, you know, my best friend's aunt's cousin's thing that she posted here might not be the best information for me to be relying on. But this can be really important, and that way it gives you a way to start the conversation too. If you've got a teenage client and say, hey, like, are you hearing stuff? Where are you hearing about it from? And then have a conversation if there is any misinformation that they're getting and things like that. And again, when we need messages of hope, I don't know who better we've ever had than Mr. Rogers, but remember to share these messages, right? There are lots of helpers out there right now. I myself am following a few Instagram accounts that are all about the good stuff happening. Look for those, because there are a lot of people doing really good things. And this can be really reassuring for kids, because they know that there's an adult out there who's trying to get it together so that everyone's going to be safe. And it's really reassuring for us as providers and caregivers as well. So what are the stress responses that you're going to be seeing in kids? And this might be stuff that you're pretty familiar with, but again, just a little refresher for what might be on the forefront right now. And we're going to talk about them based on some different age groups that you might be working with, right? And again, these are responses that will change over time with age, with development and ability. So it can look a lot of different ways, but there are some common things that you might start seeing across your clients. So starting with the really little ones, again, this might not be because they understand what they're hearing everybody talk about, but kids pick up on vibes and energy and all that, so they know when we are stressed out. So with your really little ones, things that you might see include more crying than usual. They might be way more irritable than they usually are. You might start to see, for a kid who has kind of aged out of some of their separation anxiety, they might be going back and showing some of that again, resulting in more clinginess than you're used to, right? And then with the preschool age kids, your 3 to 5 year olds, you might also see that clinginess again. And you may see some different kinds of regressive behaviors. So things that they have previously grown out of or skills that they've mastered, they're having a little bit of trouble with right now. So it could be things like bedwetting or toileting accidents that they haven't had in a long time. Those can return when they're feeling stressed, or they might have language or communication regression if they're dealing with a lot. That's pretty common. They might be talking about feeling worried a lot or having really strong feelings of being worried more than they usually do. And you may see more frequent or more intense tantrums than what they normally do as a result of stress. When you move into the school age kids, it starts to look a little bit different, mostly because they are able to communicate with us a little bit better. So they may be able to verbalize more. They might be more irritable as well, and you might hear more whining because they are stressed and they're having trouble regulating their feelings and their emotions. You might see changes in their sleep and appetite behaviors. So this could be, your kid who usually goes to bed no problem. They are suddenly having trouble falling asleep or staying asleep, or they're sleeping all the time all of a sudden. It could be that they are suddenly trying to either hoard food or limit food because there's, with all the grocery issues that have been happening, and maybe it's a kid who's normally getting a lot of their meals at school. They may be really worried about where those next meals are going to come from. So you might see kids doing things like that, or kids who are eating everything in sight. It could go either way. You might also hear about physical symptoms like stomach aches or headaches, things that are not related to any medical condition, but are a result of a stress response. And they may have trouble concentrating on their schoolwork. And this, I think, is something that we can all relate to, especially as folks have transitioned a lot to working from home. It can be hard to adjust to doing what you normally do in one setting to doing it in another. So this can be part of that, or it could just be trouble focusing based on, especially if they have a diagnosis that might contribute to that, but it could just be with everything else that's going on, it's a lot harder to focus on what's happening. And again, you may see more clinginess than usual out of this age group as well. And then once we move into our adolescence, you see a lot of similar behaviors from what you'll see at the school age level. Those sleep and appetite changes might look very similar. You might also get the complaints of stomach aches or headaches that aren't related to another medical issue. Here too, you might start to see, if you've got a really social kid, that suddenly they aren't as interested in making contact with their peers or with their friends, pulling back because they're so stressed out, and they might be isolating a little bit. And it can be really important to help them figure out creative ways to connect with the people that they care about, especially because they might not be able to go about it in their normal ways. So this could be where social media actually helps us. And you might see other things like ignoring health promotion behaviors. So like, why do I need to be washing my hands every single time I go outside, right? Why do I need to be keeping 6 feet away from people? Why can't I just go do this? Why do I need to social distance, right? Questioning what is actually the benefit of doing these things, kind of hoping to push it to the side and not really have to deal with what's going on. And finally, here too, you might get some concern about some of the stigmas that have been related to COVID-19. So there has been, it could be worry about, if I am asymptomatic, but I end up passing it along to somebody that I care about and then they get sick, like, what does that mean about me? Or, there has been a lot of racism associated with this as well. So concerns about what that might mean if someone contracts it, or if they have a friend who's dealing with bad treatment as a result of that. These are things that you might hear about from your teenage clients. So we know what it can look like. So how do we go about helping them deal with it? We are going to talk a little bit about validating children's responses to this kind of stress and review some of the ways that you can tap into what has worked before for your clients that you're working with, and identifying some specific coping skills that are related to COVID-19 and the coronavirus. So this is the big reminder that I think we've all thought about at some point. Primary caregivers are kids' main role models for how to manage new or stressful situations. They are going to look to their parent or their caregiver in order to see, how should I be responding to this? And sometimes they might be looking to you as their worker to see, how worried about this should I be, or what should I be doing? So this is where we want to remind folks to put on their own oxygen mask first, right? So if you are talking to a caregiver who is having a lot of their own anxiety around everything that's going on, or if they're feeling really fearful about things, you might need to take some time to process that with the caregiver so that they can then go have those developmentally appropriate and productive conversations with the kids in their lives, right? And I know it's really hard, and a lot of things that we might recommend parents and caregivers can't really do as much, especially if they're working from home and trying to be suddenly a homeschooling teacher and all of that. Like it's just overwhelming for everybody. But reminding caregivers to, if all they've got is closing the bathroom door for 2 minutes and taking a few breaths, or throwing in their headphones and listening to a song that is going to help soothe and calm them and get them back on track, sometimes that's what they've got. Encourage them to do those things. And also reminding them that it is okay to be honest to a degree with their kids about how they're feeling, right? This can be very normalizing and validating in and of itself, so that kids aren't feeling like, oh, why am I suddenly so stressed about this and my parents are acting like everything's fine, right? It's okay to say, you know what, I'm worried about this too, and that's why we're doing X, Y, and Z to keep ourselves healthy and to keep the people we care about healthy. And again, encouraging them to use their expertise about how much of that is actually appropriate for them to be sharing with their kids, because they know best what their child is able to handle. So when validating kids' feelings, this is what's so important to remember, is that having one adult in a child's life who is offering them care and support is the most important thing for fostering resilience in kids. So that is, if nothing else, encourage caregivers to be doing that. If you are maxed out right now trying to figure out how to do your job in this weird and wild time, if that's all you've got in you for a session or a conversation with a family, just offer that, right? And remind them that, this can be a conversation you're having with a caregiver, or it could be with your client, acknowledging that feelings like loneliness, boredom, fear of either spreading or contracting COVID-19, anxiety, stress, panic, all of these things are incredibly normal reactions to very stressful situations. They are not weird or alone in having these feelings. A lot of people are feeling that way. And again, this is where deciding how much self-disclosure is appropriate from either you as a provider or from the caregiver as they're having these conversations is really important. So what can we do about it? Apart from validating feelings and kind of role modeling how to regulate emotions a little bit, remind them about what has worked before. And again, this can be a little bit tricky because certain things might not be possible if we are trying to adhere to all the recommendations and health promotion behaviors that are so important right now. But reminding them of coping skills that they've learned in treatment, right? So have you practiced focused breathing? Have you practiced progressive muscle relaxation or guided imagery or meditation, or all these things that they might use? Is there a playlist that your teenage client listens to when they're feeling some kind of way that they can turn on and crank up and dance or something? Is there a certain toy that brings your young client a lot of comfort and they can make sure they're seeking that out when they're feeling stressed, right? Reminding them of those things that they've already learned or mastered with you in treatment. Are there family activities that the family does on a regular basis that could be really useful at this time, whether it's a movie night or playing a game or reading a story together, simple things that might not take that much time? Are they part of a faith community of any kind, right? So would it be really helpful for the child to have their caregiver pray with them, or if they're used to being part of a faith community at a church or a mosque or something, are there online services being offered through their church that maybe could help make them feel like they're still connected to that community, even if they can't physically be there, right? And peer support. So again, going back to how can we get creative, especially for the older kids who are often turning to their friends more than they are to parents and caregivers. How can they get that support from their friends if they can't just walk down the block and go hang out for a while, right? So do they have the option of FaceTiming? Can they set up some kind of Google Hangout or whatever, some way to stay in touch with their friends so they feel like they haven't lost those relationships because of everything that's going on? And finally, meaningful participation in either the community, the neighborhood, or the family, right? So this can be making sure that they have a role in the household so they feel like they're really contributing and helping out and doing something productive. And that could, be from young ones helping pick up their toys at the end of the day, all the way up to older ones who might be running out and doing a grocery run or something like that, or picking up food. But making sure it's something that's actually meaningful. And other options could be, if they want to be one of the helpers who's out there giving back and somehow making things better for the community, that can be a place where we as providers, if we're aware of resources or programs that are still functioning, that we can gather ideas and share and maybe help figure out ways that our clients might be able to get involved and do something meaningful during a time like this. So if you have any resources like that, feel free to drop those in the chat as well. If you've heard about any organizations that are looking for help that kids might be able to get involved in, because that can be really meaningful. And moving into some of the things we can do to manage stress specifically around COVID-19, I think at the top of the list for me personally has been managing exposure to media. And I think this is really important for parents, but for kids too, especially again, if we've just got the news on in the background or something and they are hearing things that are perhaps completely past what they can understand, or they're hearing new words, or it's, they're just hearing the anxiety in people's voices. That can be really stressful. So we want to make sure that we're limiting the amount of media exposure in the home, talking about with kids what they're hearing in the media. So these are conversations, again, you might be having with a caregiver, or you might be having directly with your client if they're saying, yeah, I just heard on the news this, this, and this. And you might be talking about, okay, so where can we go to get some more details or context, or this really isn't something that this child should be worrying about. Do I need to have a conversation with the caregiver about what's being shared in the home? And again, if it's older kids that are going to be going out and getting this information on their own anyway, having those conversations about reliable sources where they can go get good information that they can trust, right? Another really important thing is maintaining routines. And we talk about this a lot in trauma work with kids, right? That they need to have some sense of normalcy. And because everything is kind of upside down right now, this is really, really important. And it provides reassurance to everyone that, this is a temporary situation. We don't exactly know when it's going to end. So that's one of the hard things, is we can't say, well, by this date, we'll be back to our normal way of doing things. But having those routines and those boundaries stay in place is essential so that kids can feel some kind of normalcy while this is happening. So keep that in mind, both as a provider and as a reminder to caregivers that kids do look to us to see that everything's going to get back to some kind of normal eventually. Practicing good nutrition can be a really good way to do this, and this might look very different depending on the family that you're talking to. So again, this, for some families, it could be, let's get as many fruits and vegetables and healthy foods into us as we possibly can during this time. For other families, it might be, let's make sure that there is something in the fridge and there's a meal on the table, right? So just making sure that in some way, every family is finding a way to nourish their bodies, right? Keeping moving is another one that could look pretty different depending on the family that you're dealing with, but we know there is all kinds of science to show that there is a major connection between our minds and our bodies. When we move, our minds feel better. It's just how it is. It gets a little more complicated than that, but I don't want to keep you here all afternoon. So the important thing to remember is that if there is any way that families can find a way to get up and get moving, whether it's cranking some music that they all really love and dancing around the living room, or taking a walk every day, like that's been my saving grace, is getting out of the four walls of my house and taking a walk every day just makes me feel so much better. So any way to get moving is worthwhile. Again, maintaining relationships. This is really important, especially for the older kids who may have more of the friendships that they're really getting a lot of value from. So getting creative with how to maintain those relationships. But for young kids too, there might be a lot of, well, we usually see grandmom or pop so often, or they're usually coming over, or, I know that auntie is sick a lot and so I'm worried about her, but we can't go see them. So what do we do? This is where phone calls, text messages, video chats of any kind are really great. But if that's harder, it could be let's make a card, or let's draw a picture, or let's write an old-fashioned letter and send it to them and let them know that we're thinking about them, right? So finding all kinds of different ways to maintain those relationships. And finally, creating a family plan. This goes back to that meaningful participation piece that we talked about that can be really helpful. And this could include making sure that we've got non-perishable food items in the house. So maybe kids are helping gather the supplies. If there's a kid who's got some medications that they're taking, making sure they know where their medications are if they need them. And again, that would be an age appropriate decision to make as the provider with the caregiver and things like that. But where is the emergency contact information in case they need to get in touch with somebody and their primary caregiver isn't around? And it could also include practicing the good health promotion behaviors. So talking about, this is why we are going to wash our hands for 20 seconds, and finding a song that, if you're sick of singing happy birthday twice, find a new song that you can sing for 20 seconds. That'll make it more fun. Or teach the older kids that, in order to be a germ buster, if they want to, they can cough like a vampire, or, turn it into dabbing or something, I don't know. But getting creative in ways to engage them in doing these things that will help alleviate some stress and serve the greater purpose as well. And because so much time is now being spent at home, we've got tons of resources here that you can share with families for both keeping busy and also for managing stress. So one of the great things is creating that structure that we talked about, making a daily or weekly schedule that the whole family has access to and can see. If this link will be at the end of the slides, but this parenting blog has a template for this kind of schedule, so that could be something that you do with a family. You can download this template and then fill it in for that particular family, however they would be using or structuring their days. And it allows them to set times for educational activities versus playtime and keep things on a normal routine. So things like meals and bedtime, keeping those routines as they ever were is really helpful for kids to have that is just as normal as ever. And setting those times for the educational versus play can be really helpful for some of the older kids. So if they do have things that have been assigned from school that they need to address, setting aside ideally a specific place and time in the house where they're able to do that, so they can be in that zone when they're working on that stuff and then move to something else. Creative activities are great, and we've got all of the links that are in this resources section are linked down at the end of the slide, so you can see them more clearly. But there are tons of things out there. Tons of people are posting free stuff. So whether it's printable crafts or art projects. These are things that you could gather up for your clients too, and maybe get creative about if, you know, a lot of families aren't going to have printers that they can print crafts out on, but maybe you can find ways to get that done and maybe get them to the families to do. There are so many online classes and things happening. These lunch doodles, this artist is basically teaching a little drawing lesson every day, and there's all these videos archived. If you've got a kid who loves movies or music videos and wants to be on TikTok all the time, maybe they make a movie on a phone or make a music video. You know, get creative with what you've got in the house, right? So these are things we can be suggesting when everyone's starting to go a little stir crazy. And again, getting up and moving. Just like there's a lot of art videos and stuff, there are tons of dancing and choreography videos. This particular link is a dance teacher who's posted a bunch of choreography videos for kids, like little ones all the way up to teenagers. So it gets more advanced as you go. So maybe everyone learns a new dance routine or does some yoga in the house or go outside. We can still go outside. The Philly parks are still open. The recreation buildings and the courts and playgrounds are closed, but you can still go out and be in the green space. And being in green space is another thing that is scientifically proven to alleviate stress and make us feel better. So really encourage folks to do that. But you know, if they are going out, reminding kids that they need to only be playing with the other kids who live in their house so that they can maintain social distancing and keeping those 6 feet between people, all of that stuff. So again, those are conversations about who needs what and who can handle that and who might need some extra support to maintain that. And finally, some resources for putting the family plan together. We've got a link to all of the city site with all of the locations where there are free meal pickups. It's most of the schools, a lot of the charter schools, and there's a few community centers that are also offering meal pickups. And that is being updated constantly because it keeps changing. But if you go to the link at the end of the slides, it just updates automatically, so you'll know when and where folks can go to get food. There's also a statewide website, so if there's any folks in the webinar today who are not in Philly, there is a state website that is also updating to show where folks can go if they need access to food. And then also, you know, if you've got a kid who really loves to cook, we've got America's Test Kitchen has a bunch of activities that, you know, it could be, all right, we went and picked up all of our food, now what can we make with it? And making that into an activity as well. And, you know, other things that you can do just include engaging kids in helping to keep the home organized or, you know, as clean as possible because everything's way more chaotic right now and there's just maybe more people around than there usually are. And reminders to, you know, we're all going to be in this house, we're all going to practice good hygiene and health promotion behaviors, right? And finally, before we go, I just want to talk a little bit about how you can be communicating with your clients in creative ways. And this is something, of course, clear everything with your organizations before going to do stuff, but we can talk a little bit about individualizing your client contact in this new arena that we're in, and the potential for using social media for broad outreach as behavioral health agencies. So talking about client contact and sessions, first and foremost, follow your organization's policies, procedures, protocols regarding all client contact, right? Always be doing that, especially during this time. But within that, find ways to get creative with it. So whether it's through phone calls or text messages or emails or video chats or however you're moving forward, get creative with it. And because the more creative you get with it, the more likely you're going to be able to reach your individual clients. They're not all going to respond to the same things. So making sure that you are doing what you know will be most helpful for that client that you're reaching out to. So maybe your 16-year-old client is not going to answer the phone if you cold call them, but if you text them first or set something up, they might respond better that way. Maybe you're sending out email updates to caregivers about what's going on, but then you realize, oh wait, this caregiver doesn't have an email address, or they have one, but they don't really know how to use it, so they never check it. Like, make sure that the ways that you're setting up sessions and doing this outreach is really tailored to each individual family. And finally, making sure that when you are having the contact, that you're reassuring your clients that treatment progress is not lost because of the new ways that we're having to do things, right? So going over what they've already achieved, this can be another form of meaningful participation, engaging them in their treatment planning, going over which coping skills they're probably using right now that are working for them. Or maybe they're saying, I'm having a little trouble getting this to work in this new setting. Maybe we need to work on that a little bit. Or maybe what was the main goal of treatment before is not the priority anymore, and you might need to talk with them about adjusting and adapting as we move through this time. And then talking about social media as a potential option, this goes to more of an organizational approach to things. It's unlikely that you as a therapist or case manager are going to be posting on social media from your organization, but this could be a conversation to have with a supervisor or with your administration if you think this could be useful, or if you think what's being done is maybe not exactly hitting the mark yet, because it can be a really good way of reaching a big group of people. And you just want to be mindful of the things that you're sharing, right? So this is, as a behavioral health organization, you want to be sharing things like ideas for coping skills that are easy to try without having a therapist in the room with you. Or you want to be sharing reminders of how to be resilient, and maybe something that just makes everyone feel a little bit more like we're in this together and we're going to get through it, because that's what we do, right? Or it could be tips for parents and caregivers about how to practice what they've already done with you in session, right? You want to be sharing these kinds of behavioral health focused topics that are going to be useful, but are also staying in your lane. It is not our job as behavioral health providers to be sharing medical expertise or information. We can direct them to where to go, and we'll get to that in just a minute, but it is really not our job to know all the up-to-date information about the virus and what needs to be done. So stay in your lane. It makes it easier for everybody. And just a few tips in case your organization is doing this. Make sure, again, going back to the accurate information sources, make sure that you're reposting and sharing only from sources you know are reliable. One way to make sure you're doing that is to follow any links you intend to share, so that you can confirm that the content at that link is accurate. And, you know, it might be something that contains either information or graphic images that you wouldn't really want your families to be encountering if they're clicking through a link on your organization's page. You also want to be mindful of the language that you use. Again, there's been, you know, a lot of discrimination and things associated with this particular crisis. So not using any discriminatory language in your posting, and also avoiding politicizing the messages that you post. This is always tricky in this day and age, but what we don't want to do is be taking a side. We just want to be sharing information that we think will be helpful and valuable to our clients. And so to do that, stay within your expertise and within your organization's mission. So as behavioral health providers or child welfare or educators, making sure that we are talking about what we can do for families within our roles in their lives and meeting the missions of our organizations, right? So if we want to promote health and wellness, that is what we are promoting, but we're doing it through this lens and not sharing things that are really beyond the scope of our work. So to stay informed, you may have seen this flattening the curve article going around from the Washington Post. It's a really good descriptor of what that phrase actually means, because that is another one that everyone keeps throwing around, and some folks might be saying, well, what exactly are you talking about? And then for good updates around COVID-19, we've got the City of Philadelphia Department of Public Health offering updates, as well as the State Department of Health and the CDC at the federal level. If you are interested, you can sign up to get text alerts on your phone from the Philly Department of Public Health by texting COVID PHL to that number there at the bottom. I personally have found I'm getting enough information other ways, so I have not signed up for that. But if you think it would be a good, easy way to stay up to date, feel free to do that. Here are some of the places I pulled some information from. If you're interested in reading more about any of this, these are some good places to start. And this NCTSN, the second from the bottom, is a good guide for if your agency does want to start looking at social media options. That's a good guide for how to go about doing that in a good way. Here are all the resources that were linked up above in the slides. So we will make sure that you get all of these so that you can be sharing them, using them yourselves if you need to. But everything is here that was referenced above. And again, you will get that emailed to you after today. And finally, just stay in touch with us at BH10. We've got a lot of stuff in the works so that we can continue to offer you guys new information and updates. Like I said before, the next webinar will be on Thursday at 1 o'clock. That one will be about coping and self-care, which I think we could all use a little bit of. And then next week, we will have one about telecommuting that I think is going to be really great, since we are all moving into this and some of us have been thrown in and never done it before. So it'll be great to get some tips on that. You can go to the BH10 website to sign up for both of those. It'll be the same as this, where you get the link emailed to you the day before. And also, as I noted, this webinar was recorded, so you'll be able to check back at BH10 to get the recording of this webinar, or to pass it along to colleagues or friends or family that you think might benefit from some of the information that was available here. So I want to thank you all for spending some time with us here today. If you do have any questions, please make sure that you drop them in the chat. And if you have any resources that you know of in your communities or that you think would be really helpful, drop those into the chat too. So let's see. All right. And yeah, so I think the question is if we can use any of the webinars to train students, interns, or employees. I would say absolutely. These webinars are open to everybody. So even if it's, someone that's not necessarily directly in the system, we're definitely targeting them to DBH IDS related folks, but please encourage people to sign up. Let's see. You will be given the resources. Okay. All of the webinars will be recorded and available on the BH10 website as well. And I see a few suggestions for some new topics, so thank you for those. I'm really grateful to you all for doing this. Yes, please register individually for each webinar. We're posting them as we're developing new content, which is happening all of the time. So stay tuned to the BH10 website because there's going to be all kinds of new good stuff happening. Thank you for sharing resources. Anything else, please, I'll stick around for a minute. Please feel free to drop it in the chat if you have any other questions that I missed. But I'm really grateful to you for all the work that you're doing. This is tough stuff out there and we're all doing our best to adapt. So big props to all of you for sticking to it, and the kids and families you're working with are very lucky. So thank you all.